This is Harry Davies from Air Fighting, joined by Donn Davis ahead of your first event in Saudi Arabia. Don, it feels like a very big fight week for you guys. I'm sure you're thrilled to get this underway.
Champs v champs, never been held before in combat sports. So to me, it's what I would want as a fan, and so it's what we're giving fans. PFL champs against Bellator champs, sold out for Saturday. Super exciting.
We spoke with Pete Murray yesterday and the head of Surge Sports, and we were discussing with Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh how he sort of wants the best fights possible, and this card is really one of the best you probably put on in the company's history. But it's stacked from top to bottom, former champions, past and present champions. It's a sort of a great fitting one for the first one in Saudi, right?
I'd even go further. I think this will be the best MMA card in 2024. You've got 12 current or former MMA champions in 6 fights. Unheard of. And the average ranking of fighters on this card, 25. If you add all the fights together, their world ranking is 25. That's the lowest world ranking of any card in the history of MMA that we could find. So if you want to see great fights top to bottom, this is the card.
This fight card, talk to me a bit about how you got, all the big names to compete on one event, because it's hard to get girls like Carissa, right, who you're busy with boxing, and Biagio, and even the top dogs. I know we had 1 or 2 pullouts, but it's almost hard to get everyone on one event, and you've sort of done that, right?
One is historic. First MMA event in Saudi Arabia ever. So I think a lot of people want to be a part of something that's big, and this is big. And number 2 is the opportunity to face the best. Most companies will never do a champs v champs event. Everybody's worried about protecting, or what if somebody beats somebody? We want to focus on giving the fans the best. I get a lot of questions. Well, what if all Bellator wins? What if all PFL wins? What if this happens? What if that happens? We're focused on Saturday. Saturday is going to be the very best fight event for fans. That's all that matters. And what happens after that, we'll be good. We'll figure that out after that. And so I think if you always focus on that, then you can make the card the very best, and you're not worried about setting something up tomorrow.
Something I have to ask is, I've listened to a couple of Dana White's post-fight press conferences, and it seemed like, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, he was like, you get asked about the PFL, he's like, look, I don't want to say anything bad, I love the guy who does it, like, they're doing something great over there. But recently he sort of changed his tone a bit more, not critical, but a bit different. Do you think that shift has maybe come from the moves that you've made in the past few months, or is there a different reason for that?
Yeah, I think it is. Look, we respect Dana and the UFC. They built the MMA industry. They're the current leader. We're the undisputed number 2, but we're growing 3 times faster than they are. And we now have a fight roster equal to theirs on the media side, not yet on the pay-per-view side. He's not happy about that. He's a little worried about that. Dana doesn't get grumpy about anything unless he's worried. So I'm sure our acquiring Bellator, signing Francis, expanding globally, renewing with ESPN, growing our audience 50% this year, I'm sure he doesn't like that. Our aim is to be the co-leader. Our aim is not to be the number 2, and we think we're making the moves to do that.
Obviously some of his comments are, critical, but is it almost quite nice to hear that he's worried in a sense, because it shows that you're doing something right?
Yeah. Look, total respect for them. Great company, great product. We're doing something very different. The sports season format. Win in advance, lose and go home. And we're doing something very different for fighters. We give them an option. You come here and you want a box? Fine. You come here and you want 50% of pay-per-view? Great. You come here and you also want to win $1 million bonus if you win the championship? We give you that. So we pay more, we give you more flexibility, we're a very respectful organization. So fighters have 2 great choices. Fans, 2 great choices. There's 10 soccer leagues in the world, 10. There clearly can be 2 winning MMA organizations.
Something I have to ask is, because there's a lot of talk this week about potentially Francis Ngannou's next opponent, maybe the winner of Bader Freire could serve it. But one person I have to ask is, your other biggest star, Jake Paul, I spoke to Pete Murray, and I was like, look, are we going to see Jake in the cage, in the smart cage this year? And he said, we just need to find the right opponent. But who is the right opponent for Jake? Because obviously his first MMA fight, some people would say, you maybe put him against someone at the same level. What do you think? Who would be the first big opponent for Jake in the cage?
That's a great question. One, Jake has his own smart cage, and he's down training in it.
In Puerto Rico, right?
In Puerto Rico since last December. He wants to be ready. He does not want to start with a very light opponent. He wants to start in a serious way. So I think he'll be ready first quarter 2025. So I think the big thing for Jake is he's serious and he wants to be ready. Then the second thing is what's the right opponent when he's ready. But I don't have any doubt that it'll be a great fight, a big fight, and it'll be first quarter 2025. And we'll see Francis the next 6 months in the PFL Smart Cage in 2024.
Do you put Jake against someone that maybe he's got a history with, like Tommy Fury? I know there were sort of talks about that, or do you put him against, you know, maybe an MMA guy who's had a couple of fights, just so it's more legitimate? What do you think? Is the name more important, or is the experience more important at this point?
I think what we've seen with Jake is he can put on an extremely interesting, compelling fight with both kind of fighters. I would have loved to see Nate Diaz accept the challenge and do that in MMA. And I would love to see Tommy Fury in MMA. Well, those are two very different fights, right? It couldn't be more different. It's A to Z. But I think both would have been very interesting for Jake. Now, one, he needs a lot more training than the other. So it would have been different timing. So Jake is brilliant at picking opponents and brilliant at getting ready for opponents. So either one of those, I think, could work, just different timing.
Is it safe to say, in an ideal world, you maybe have Francis at the end of the year, depending on what your sort of pay-per-view schedule's like, and then, like you said, Jake maybe in the first quarter of 2025?
Yeah, I think Francis could be any time this year. That's opponent-driven, and that's also boxing-driven. We're great partners with Francis, so we respect his full schedule, MMA and boxing. And once he does business with AJ, then he'll turn to MMA, and we'll see what happens this Saturday. La Problema versus Bader. Other than John Jones, the winner of that, I think, is the best heavyweight in the world. Everybody says, UFC. No. There ain't nobody in UFC other than John Jones who would be more interesting for Francis than coming out of this heavyweight fight than La Problema Bader. Two champions, more problems than anybody else. Whoever looks really good there, I think, is going to have a real opportunity to say, Francis, let's go. And I think that fight's got a chance of happening, but we'll see what Francis says.
I spoke to Bader yesterday and I asked him about, obviously he's focused on Ferrero, as you said, but I asked him about Ngannou's fight with Joshua, and I said, who do you think will win, who do you want to win? And he said, well, I actually sort of want Joshua to win, because if Ngannou wins, it's like, wow, the boxing conversation continue, right? Do you think for your business that it doesn't really matter what goes on with Francis' fight against Joshua? Does it harm his reputation if he loses? Does it harm his potential fight in PFL if he wins? What do you sort of think of that fight and how it surrounds your business?
I always want all of our partners to win. I never root against any of them, and Francis is a special guy. I never bet against Francis. So if he wins, it'll work out great for us. If he loses, it'll work out great for us. Either way, we'll make it work.
What have you made of his journey into boxing? Because I remember that fight.
Incredible. I was on record with 2 interviews saying, don't bet against Francis. I think he won that fight. A man who survives 2 years across the desert in detention camps just to start his life, you don't bet against him. Man who stared down Dana White in the UFC for 2 years and said, I'm leaving, with no other options, but had a plan and knew what to do, you don't bet against him. He is built different than other people. He has an inner resolve, very similar to what people saw in Mike Tyson. Yes, there's fighting skills, but there's other skills that Francis is very rare and people didn't see on display until Fury. So I think he will be the Bo Jackson of combat sports. He will win the heavyweight title of the world in boxing. How that happens, I'm not an oracle, but he will, and he will retain his heavyweight championship in MMA. How that happens, all these things take twists and turns, but before this is said and done, he will be the Bo Jackson of combat sports.
Francis will inevitably go down as a legend in heavyweight MMA and boxing now. Someone who is a bona fide legend himself is Mike Tyson, and he's been part of your events previously. I believe he's going to be there on Saturday night to hand out.
Mike arrived. I saw him this morning.
How was that, seeing him?
I love Mike. Unbelievably wise. Fantastic to see him. I met Mike 6 years ago when I reached out to him when I started the PFL, because I said, Mike, when you were a boxer, you would have loved what I was doing, because nobody would have been in control but you. Not Don King, not Dana White, you, the boxer. And so we've become very good business friends. And so I'm delighted that as the greatest champion of all times, he's handing out the greatest belt. A champion beating a champion. So I'm thrilled that he's here, and he'll be handing out the Champs v. Champs belts on Saturday.
I was actually in the gym, the fighter lobby, right, and I was on a treadmill with my friend. In between us was Fedor Emelianenko, and I was like, oh my god, sort of took me back a bit. And he's been in talks to box Mike Tyson. I know they've been rubbished a bit, but what have you made of that? Given Mike's a close friend of yours and business partner, any sort of truth to those, do you know, or not? And maybe the PFL will be involved in that, I don't know.
We stick to our MMA expertise. Now, I think Mike's doing fine in business. I don't think he needs any of that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So with Francis, I have to ask about, he's closer to 40 now than he is to 30, but he's still, hitting his prime, and something that when he obviously parted way with UFC and some of you guys, like, he's going to have a couple fights and he'll be done, but it seems like his name is now at the center of every heavyweight's mouth, right? What do you make of that? And is that a decision that you sort of knew when you signed him? A lot of people saying he's past his prime, but you sort of saw otherwise, that he was very much in his prime, right?
Look, we saw that he was in his prime, and we saw he was a rare different person in terms of his ambition and his desire. And when people want to make their mark in life, those are people you want to partner with. He was not looking for more money from us. We paid him the exact same that UFC offered him, and he turned down. He was looking to make a mark. Boxing, PFL Africa. Doing something great and doing something different and bigger. And I think he'll continue to do that, and we're thrilled to do it with him. We're going to launch PFL Africa next year. It'll be a huge success like PFL Europe has been. You saw Cedric Doumbé sold out Accor Arena. That's PFL Europe. That's not PFL Global League that we're talking about. That's not pay-per-view super fight that we're talking about. That's PFL Europe that we're talking about. Sold out Accor Arena.
Back to back.
And so how do we build that in PFL Africa? How do we create a real pathway, for that continent and those fighters to become champions in the sports season format? Francis is the chairman of that. He's just not a figurehead of that. So I think his desire to have real impact is very similar to LeBron James. There's some people who are just Kevin Durant, the great basketball player. There's some people who are LeBron James, really want to make a difference in their sport, and that's Francis Ngannou.
Something that was very selfless of him when he signed last year, I remember he said, look, my opponent is going to get a minimum of $2 million. Yeah. And I spoke to Bader, and he sort of joked, well, who says I'm getting the minimum? You're right, sort of playing his cards there. But is that still on the table?
Yep.
For? I'm guessing that's something that's added incentive for Bader and Ferreira, assuming that they might be next for Francis.
Yep, it is.
So, final question. PFL this year, we've got, like you said, PFL MENA, PFL Africa next year. What's the sort of plan? We're in February now, going ahead for the next 10 months to the end of the year.
Well, the other big thing you didn't mention is the reimagined Bellator Champions Series. Big deal. March 22nd launches. Bellator's always had great fighters, but we've reimagined the product. 8 Champions Series events. Every single event, 2 title fights. The best Bellator fighters, all fighting at the top. So we took half the fighters and moved into the PFL League. This will be the toughest test in the world, in the league. But you'll see the very best fighters, Patchy Mix, Johnny Elvin, fight on the Bellator Champions Series. And it'll have premium distribution like never before. You couldn't find Bellator before consistent. And it'll be in 8 of the great cities of the world. Pure international product. Most international fans have never had enough MMA events. They don't get enough from UFC, they don't get enough from the PFL League season. So we'll take it to 8 great international cities of the world. So I think the Bellator International Series with the champions will be a truly great product start March 22nd, and we'll announce all that distribution starting probably in 2 weeks.